Welcome. Before we begin, please dim the lights in your room and perhaps turn on a soft fan. Today we step away from the Industrial Revolution. We are not here to discuss great kings or mechanical progress. Instead, we explore women who turned the art of social decay into a form of power. In a society where even a glimpse of an ankle was a scandal, these high-class courtesans held the keys to the bedrooms of the empire's elite. It was a beautiful hypocrisy. A world where morality was a mask worn in public while the shadows told a much more complicated and daring story. To understand the Victorian era, one must look past the stiff collars and the corsets. We must look into the hearts of those who lived dangerously. These men of high standing presented an image of perfection, yet they sought refuge in the arms of women who the law officially chose to ignore. The courtesan was more than just a companion. She was a master of psychology, a keeper of secrets, and a woman who understood the price of freedom. They navigated a world that wanted them silent, yet they became the loudest whispers in the ears of those who governed the most powerful nation on earth. Listen closely to the rhythm of the city. Behind the sound of horses and industry lies the heartbeat of a hidden economy built on desire and wit. This is the story of the scandalous lives that defined an age of contradiction. A story of silk, shadow, and the heavy price of social climbing. The grandeur of the era was often a hollow shell, masking the desperate struggles and the brilliant maneuvers of women trying to survive and truly thrive. For a courtesan, every piece of jewellery was a trophy, a sign of a battle won in the high-stakes game of seduction and elite political influence. Privacy was their greatest asset. Behind closed doors, the rigid rules of the Victorian age melted away, leaving only the raw reality of human ambition. The industrial age brought wealth, but it also brought a crushing greyness. The courtesans provided the colour, the danger, and the intellectual spark the elite craved. Wealthy men sought more than just physical presence. They sought an escape from the suffocating boredom of their own curated and highly disciplined public lives. A simple gesture, the flick of a fan or a lingering look, could mean the difference between a life of luxury and a life of poverty. The river carried the secrets of the city to the sea. It flowed past palaces and slums alike, indifferent to the scandals brewing in the dark. They spoke in hushed tones of the women they could never acknowledge in the light of day, yet could never forget in the dark of night. Each step into the night was a calculated risk. To be a courtesan was to walk a tightrope between absolute stardom and total social annihilation. They were the ghosts of the high society, haunting the dreams of the powerful and disrupting the carefully laid plans of the traditional noble families. Knowledge was their weapon. They read the books their peers were forbidden to touch, and they understood the world better than most of their clients. Evidence of their influence was often burned. History prefers the clean version, but the truth is found in the ashes of these destroyed private correspondences. Even in the most beautiful places, there was a sense of decay. The Victorian era was obsessed with death and beauty, two things courtesans knew well. Patience was a virtue they perfected. They knew when to wait, when to speak, and when to let the silence do the work for them. They stood out because they had to. To be ignored was to be forgotten, and to be forgotten was to lose everything in this competitive world. Their lives were meticulously sewn together, a patchwork of lies, truths, and performances that kept the world guessing about who they truly were inside. The mirror saw the truth that the public never did. It saw the exhaustion, the calculation, and the rare moments of genuine, unmasked human emotion. This was their territory. Between the parks and the palaces, they built empires of influence that rivaled the formal institutions of the British government. They lived by the clock. Youth was their currency, and every second that passed was a reminder that their window of opportunity was slowly closing shut. Do not mistake their luxury for ease. Every diamond was paid for with a piece of their soul and a constant fear of the coming winter. They were the stars of a play that never ended. Life was a stage, and they were the most skilled actresses in the entire city of London. Behind the laughter and the wine there was often a profound loneliness. To be loved by everyone is often to be truly known by no one. Even with all their gold, they were often prisoners of their own success, bound by the expectations of the men who paid for their company. The transition from the light to the dark was seamless for them. They moved between worlds with a grace that few others could ever hope to master. The world of the courtesan is about to be revealed. We pull back the curtain on a life that was as dangerous as it was dazzling. Prepare yourself for a journey through the scandalous, the sublime, and the heartbreaking reality of the women who dared to own their own destiny. The night is ending, but our story is just beginning. Let us dive into the divide between the velvet ribbons and the London mud. Remember, in the Victorian age, silence was loud, and the most important things were always said in the dark. Let the journey begin now. The gap between a virtuous woman and a courtesan was a canyon. One was the angel in the house, the other was a social outcast. The standard for women was domesticity and silence. They were expected to be invisible pillars of moral stability for their husbands and their many children. But the courtesan rejected this invisibility. She traded her moral standing for a voice, a presence, and a level of luxury that most women only dreamed of. Do not confuse these elite women with the poor souls in the East End. In Whitechapel, survival was a daily battle fought in the freezing mud. The courtesan lived in a different world entirely. Her home was a sanctuary of art, fine wine, and intellectual conversation, far from the city's stench. Their lifestyle was a direct affront to the Victorian ideal of thrift and modesty. They lived loudly, eating the finest foods and drinking the best wines. Men didn't just visit them for physical intimacy. They sought the sharp wit and the political insight that their proper wives were never allowed to develop. To the public, they were fallen women, but in the private salons of power, they were more influential than the most decorated generals or politicians. This was a transaction of more than just money. It was an exchange of freedom for influence, a dangerous bargain that required nerves of pure steel. They walked through society like beautiful predators. Everyone knew who they were, yet everyone pretended they didn't exist until the sun went down every day. They were businesswomen in an era that denied women the right to own property. They found a loophole in the system and exploited it brilliantly. They broke every rule in these books, yet they mastered the very social graces they were using to subvert the entire structure of the aristocracy. They were the architects of their own identity. In a world of rigid labels, they chose to be something that defied every traditional social category. The scent of a courtesan was the scent of success and danger combined. It was a fragrance that lingered in the halls of power long after. Their lives were lived in the margins. They were the bridge between the highborn and the lowborn, the respectable and the scandalous, the known and unknown. Every secret they kept was another brick in their fortress. They knew that information was the only true currency in the treacherous city of London. The image they presented to the world was a carefully crafted lie. The reality was a constant struggle for relevance in a rapidly changing social landscape. The church condemned them from the pulpit, but many of the men in the pews were the very ones funding their luxurious and secret lifestyles. The pressure to maintain the facade was immense. One slip, one public scandal too many, and they could find themselves back in the London mud. They were the ultimate audience and the ultimate performers. They understood the theatre of life better than any playwright of the 19th century could ever. Everything they wore was armour. Their clothing was a statement of their independence and their refusal to conform to the drab expectations of the era. They were the influencers of their time. If a famous courtesan wore a certain style, every noblewoman in London would secretly try to copy it. In the quiet moments, they were just women trying to find a sense of peace in a world that only valued them for their utility. The climb to the top was steep and dangerous. Many started with nothing and reached the heights of society, only to fall back down again. Scandal was always just a heartbeat away. A single mistake could shatter a reputation built over years of careful and very strategic social manoeuvring. Many ended their days in obscurity, their names erased from the polite history of the city, their stories buried in the cold earth of London. Beauty was their most fleeting asset. They had to capitalise on it while they could, knowing that the world was cruel to those who aged. These were the tools of the trade. Each item told a story of a conquest, a secret kept, or a promise made in the dark. The conversation was the real aphrodisiac. They were trained in the art of listening, making every man feel like he was the centre of the universe. They moved like ghosts through the houses of the rich, always present but never truly part of the families they so deeply and secretly influenced. The seasons changed, but the game remained the same. It was a cycle of pursuit, capture, and the eventual, inevitable search for something new and exciting. They were survivors. Behind the delicate lace and the soft words was a core of iron that kept them standing when the world tried to break. They were the first women to understand the power of branding. They created an aura around themselves that made them irresistible to the ruling class. Even their joy was a performance. They were never truly off the clock, always aware that every smile was a part of their social currency. The night was for business, the morning for rest. They lived on a different schedule than the rest of the world, a life of shadows. This was their kingdom. From this height, the scandals and the struggles seemed small, yet they were the very things that kept the city turning. They were ready for whatever the new century would bring. But for now, they ruled the night, the heart, and the hidden pulse of London. Education was their secret ladder. A courtesan had to be more than beautiful. She had to be the most interesting person in any room she entered. They were trained like athletes of the mind. Music, languages, and the art of conversation were all part of a rigorous curriculum for these aspiring women. Speaking French was a mark of sophistication. It allowed them to converse with diplomats and nobility in the language of international relations and very high-stakes romance. Their letters were works of art. A well-written note could entice a duke or soothe a worried politician, making them feel heard and deeply understood. This was where the power was built. In these quiet spaces, they studied the news of the day, preparing themselves for the evening's intense intellectual combat. They knew more about the state of the empire than many voters did. This knowledge made them indispensable advisors to the men who actually held the power. The arts were not just a hobby, they were a way to connect with the refined sensibilities of their clients, proving they were women of culture. The transformation was physical as well as mental. The corset was a ritual, a painful reminder of the constraints they had to master to truly succeed. Every detail of their appearance was calculated. They chose fabrics that invited touch and colours that commanded attention, making every movement a deliberate and focused act. Makeup was a mask. It hid the fatigue and the fear, allowing them to present a face of eternal youth and perfect, unshakable, and very calm confidence. They were the first influencers. When they appeared in Hyde Park, their fashion choices were documented and envied by every woman in the entire city. Horsemanship was another vital skill. Seeing a courtesan ride with skill and grace was a powerful display of her vitality, her independence, and her social standing. This was their stage. Here they were seen by the world, a provocative reminder of the freedom that lay just outside the boundaries of polite Victorian society. They mastered the art of being seen without ever seeming to try. It was a subtle dance of visibility and mystery that kept their value high. They were a sisterhood of sorts, sharing intelligence on which men were generous and which were dangerous, helping each other navigate the treacherous waters of London. Seduction was not just about the body, it was about the senses. They created environments of absolute comfort and beauty that were impossible for men to resist. They understood the power of the small gesture. A touch, a look, a whisper could do more than 1,000 words ever could in this world. They were masters of lighting an atmosphere. They knew exactly how to present themselves to highlight their beauty and hide the reality of their difficult lives. Behind the glamour, they were astute financial managers. They had to be, as they had no legal safety net and could lose everything in an instant. Money was freedom. Each coin was a step away from the life they had left behind and a step toward a future they could finally control. They hosted the most exclusive salons in London. At these tables, poets, politicians, and artists gathered to discuss ideas that were too radical for polite society. They were the catalysts of creativity. Many great works of Victorian art and literature were inspired by the women who lived on the edge of scandal. They were not just companions, they were icons. They represented a life of passion and intellect that the rigid Victorian social structure simply could not provide. The mystery was part of the charm. By never revealing their whole selves, they remained objects of eternal fascination and desire for the men of London. Every luxury was a hard-won victory. They never forgot the value of what they had, and they were always prepared to fight to keep it all. The information they gathered was their insurance. They knew the weaknesses of the powerful, and they used that knowledge to protect their own precarious social positions. Their work was never done. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities to solidify their influence and secure their place in the history of the city. They were the ultimate self-made women. In a world that gave them nothing, they built lives of extraordinary wealth, intellect, and very real social influence. They were the queens of the shadows, ruling a world that didn't want to admit they existed, yet could not function properly without their secret presence. These pearls were more than decoration. They were a testament to their skill, their wit, and their ability to navigate the most complex social hierarchies. The pen was as powerful as the person holding it. In their letters, they could make or break reputations with a single well-placed and very clever word. They were master observers of human nature. They saw the truth behind the masks, and they used that truth to their advantage in every social interaction. Each door they opened led to a new level of power. They were always moving forward, always looking for the next opportunity to expand their secret influence. They knew they were exceptional. In a world of conformity, they were the originals, the women who dared to be more than what they were told. They were their own masters. Despite the men who paid for their time, the courtesans were the ones truly in control of their own lives and destinies. They lived for the moment, but they planned for the future. It was a delicate balance that required a high level of intelligence and very constant vigilance. They were the heart of the night. Without them, the Victorian era would have been a much darker and more boring place for the ruling elite class. They invite us to look closer, to see the world as they saw it, a place of infinite possibility for those brave enough to seize their own power. Who truly ruled London? Was it the politicians in Parliament, or the women in Mayfair apartments who influenced the very men who sat in those chairs? The courtesans held keys to more than just rooms. They held keys to the hearts and minds of the men who decided the fate of the nation. In the privacy of a courtesan's salon, military alliances were discussed and tax policies were debated long before they ever reached the official halls of government. They were the first lobbyists, using their charm and their intelligence to sway the opinions of those who held the strings of global economic and political power. Scandal was a currency they traded in. They knew how to use the press to their advantage, creating an aura of mystery that only increased their value. They were masters of the deal. Every relationship was a contract, a carefully negotiated exchange of influence for security in a world that offered women very little. Their homes were neutral ground, places where rivals could meet and talk without the prying eyes of the public or the constraints of their formal social roles. They were political analysts in an era that denied them the vote. They understood the nuances of power better than most of the men they were advising. Information was their most valuable asset. A secret shared in the dark could be used to protect a friend or to neutralize a dangerous and powerful enemy. Their influence reached far beyond the streets of London. Through their connections, they could affect the lives of people in the furthest corners of the British Empire. They were the invisible architects of history. While men were the public faces of power, these women were often the ones moving the pieces on the board. They were economic powerhouses in their own right. They invested their earnings in property and business, building a legacy that would outlast their own beauty and fame. They knew they were playing a dangerous game, but the rewards were worth the risk. They had achieved a level of independence that was truly extraordinary. Every gem was a mark of a successful negotiation, a sign of their ability to extract wealth and status from the most powerful men in the world. They were the ultimate networkers. They connected people, ideas, and ambitions, creating a web of influence that was as strong as it was completely invisible to society. They were not just companions, they were leaders in their own world. They commanded respect and loyalty from those who entered their private and very powerful circle. They were the shadow queens of London, ruling with a soft hand and a sharp mind, making sure their interests were always protected in the game of power. They understood that power was not just about control, it was about the ability to adapt and to thrive in a world that was constantly changing around them. They were the first media manipulators. They knew how to shape public opinion and how to use the power of the press to achieve their own private goals. Every luxury was a reminder of their success. They had built a life of beauty and intellect in a world that wanted to keep them in the dark. The city was their playground, and they knew every corner of it. They moved through the streets with a confidence that came from knowing they were indispensable. They were the masters of their own destiny, women who had chosen a path of danger and had reached the very heights of secret and political power. They had achieved what few others could, a life of freedom and influence in a world that was designed to keep them small and completely and totally silent. They were the heart of the city's secret life, the women who made the Victorian era a time of both extreme morality and also of extreme and hidden power. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence would be felt for generations to come, even if their names were often erased from the official history. They had lived a life of extraordinary passion and intellect, and they had done it all on their own terms, in a world that was never truly theirs. This was their world, a place of secrets and power, where they were the ones truly in charge of the games that were being played in the dark. They were the ultimate self-made women, and their story is one of triumph, tragedy, and the extraordinary power of the human spirit to survive and to truly thrive. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence was the secret pulse of the Victorian era, a time of both great change and great and hidden tradition. They were the masters of their own destiny, women who had chosen a path of danger and had reached the very heights of secret and political power. They had achieved what few others could, a life of freedom and influence in a world that was designed to keep them small and completely and totally silent. They were the heart of the city's secret life, the women who made the Victorian era a time of both extreme morality and also of extreme and hidden power. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence would be felt for generations to come, even if their names were often erased from the official history. They had lived a life of extraordinary passion and intellect, and that they had done it all on their own terms, in a world that was never truly theirs. This was their world, a place of secrets and power, where they were the ones truly in charge of the games that were being played in the dark. They were the ultimate self-made women, and their story is one of triumph, tragedy, and the extraordinary power of the human spirit to survive and to truly thrive. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence was the secret pulse of the Victorian era, a time of both great change and great and hidden tradition. Let us look at Catherine Walters, known as Skittles. She was more than a mistress. She was an icon of beauty, independence, and very real social power. She rode with a skill that rivaled any man's, commanding the attention of everyone in the park, from the lowliest servant to the most powerful and wealthy dukes. Skittles was a woman who knew her value. She used her charm to build a fortune, becoming one of the wealthiest and most influential women of her entire time. She was a confidant to the powerful, a woman whose advice was sought by the men who shaped the destiny of the entire British Empire and beyond. Her life was a testament to the power of a woman who refuses to be limited by the expectations of her society and her very difficult social background. Then there was Cora Pearl, the queen of the French demi-monde. She was famous for her audacity, her wit, and her ability to shock the very upper class. Cora was legendary for her theatricality. She once served herself on a silver platter at a dinner party, a bold statement of her own status and very power. She lived life on her own terms, spending fortunes as quickly as she made them, a woman who refused to be constrained by the rules of society. Behind the glamour, there was a fierce drive to succeed. She knew that her beauty was her greatest asset and her most fleeting and very fragile social currency. But the price of freedom was high. As the years passed, the world that once adored her began to turn away, leaving her to face a difficult and lonely future. Many courtesans used toxic cosmetics to maintain their youthful appearance, unknowingly poisoning themselves in their desperate and very tragic attempt to stay relevant in a cruel world. The pursuit of perfection was a slow death. The very tools they used to stay beautiful were the things that would eventually destroy their health and their lives. For many, the end was not grand. As their beauty faded, so did their influence, and they were often left with nothing but the memories of their glory. The society that once celebrated them was quick to forget them. They were cast aside like yesterday's fashions, their stories lost to the silence of the very cold city. They were the flowers that bloomed brilliantly but briefly. Their stories are a reminder of the fragility of fame and the heavy price of living outside the rules. But even in their tragic ends, they were remarkable. They had dared to live a life of their own choosing, and they had done it with extraordinary grace. Their names survive in the margins of history. They are the scandalous lives that still fascinate us today, the women who challenged the very world they lived in. They were more than their scandals. They were intelligent, ambitious, and very complex women who used the only tools they had to build a life of power. The lights are going out on the world they knew, but their influence remains, a secret pulse that still beats in the heart of the City of London. Their stories are a part of the city's soul. They are the shadows that give the Victorian era its depth and its extraordinary, enduring, and very powerful mystery. They ask us to remember them, not as victims or as saints, but as women who lived fully and who dared to be more than they were allowed. The day is over, but their memory lives on. They are the scandalous lives that define a time of extraordinary contradiction and very real and powerful change. Every ribbon was a story, every story was a life, and every life was a testament to the power of the human spirit to survive and thrive. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence was the secret pulse of the Victorian era, a time of both great change and great tradition. They were the masters of their own destiny, women who had chosen a path of danger and had reached the very heights of secret and political power. They had achieved what few others could, a life of freedom and influence in a world that was designed to keep them small and completely and totally silent. They were the heart of the city's secret life, the women who made the Victorian era a time of both extreme morality and also of extreme and hidden power. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence would be felt for generations to come, even if their names were often erased from the official history. They had lived a life of extraordinary passion and intellect, and they had done it all on their own terms, in a world that was never truly theirs. This was their world, a place of secrets and power, where they were the ones truly in charge of the games that were being played in the dark. They were the ultimate self-made women, and their story is one of triumph, tragedy, and the extraordinary power of the human spirit to survive and to truly thrive. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence was the secret pulse of the Victorian era, a time of both great change and great and hidden tradition. They were the masters of their own destiny, women who had chosen a path of danger and had reached the very heights of secret and political power. They had achieved what few others could, a life of freedom and influence in a world that was designed to keep them small and completely and totally silent. They were the heart of the city's secret life, the women who made the Victorian era a time of both extreme morality and also of extreme and hidden power. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence would be felt for generations to come, even if their names were often erased from the official history. They had lived a life of extraordinary passion and intellect, and they had done it all on their own terms, in a world that was never truly theirs. This was their world, a place of secrets and power, where they were the ones truly in charge of the games that were being played in the dark. The sun sets on the Victorian age, carrying its secrets into the cold mist of history. The world is changing, and the old ways are slowly fading away. The gaslight is replaced by electricity. The shadows where the courtesans once ruled are being illuminated by a new, colder, and much more unforgiving light of day. Today's London is different, yet the echoes of the past remain. The women of today still walk the same streets, carrying the silent legacy of those who came before. The stones of the city remember. They tell the stories of those who were never meant to be heard, the women who lived in the margins and the shadows. The scandalous lives of the courtesans are more than just stories of the past. They are a part of our collective memory, a reminder of the human spirit's power. They were not saints, nor were they victims. They were real women who chose to play a dangerous game and who did it with extraordinary and very real skill. They exposed the hypocrisy of their time, showing that morality is often just a mask for power, and that the truth is always found in the shadows. As we finish our journey, take a moment to reflect on the world they built. It was a place of beauty, danger, and extraordinary and very real intellectual influence. The river continues to flow, carrying the secrets of the past into the future. It is a silent witness to the lives that have been lived on its banks. The light is fading, the story is coming to an end, but the questions it has raised will continue to linger in your mind long after the screen goes dark. We hope this story has given you a new perspective on the past. The Victorian age was a time of great contradiction, and the courtesans were its heart. Good night. May your dreams be full of the beauty and the mystery of the lives we have explored together today in the shadows of the old city. Sleep well in a world that is perhaps a little less harsh than the London of 1860. The shadows are long, but the morning is always coming soon. The light is gone, the story is told, but the echoes of the past will always be there, if you only know how and where to listen closely. History is written by the winners, but the truth is lived by everyone. Remember the women who dared to own their own destiny in the heart of London. Thank you for joining us. We hope you have found this journey into the shadows as fascinating as we have. The past is never truly dead and gone. The Victorian age is over, but its secrets are still with us. They are a part of who we are and of the world we have built together. Every rose has its thorns, and every life has its price. The courtesans knew this better than anyone else in their complex and very dangerous social world. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence would be felt for generations to come, even if their names were often erased from the official history. They had lived a life of extraordinary passion and intellect, and that they had done it all on their own terms, in a world that was never truly theirs. This was their world, a place of secrets and power, where they were the ones truly in charge of the games that were being played in the dark. They were the ultimate self-made women, and their story is one of triumph, tragedy, and the extraordinary power of the human spirit to survive and to truly thrive. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence was the secret pulse of the Victorian era, a time of both great change and great and hidden tradition. They were the masters of their own destiny, women who had chosen a path of danger and had reached the very heights of secret and political power. They had achieved what few others could, a life of freedom and influence in a world that was designed to keep them small and completely and totally silent. They were the heart of the city's secret life, the women who made the Victorian era a time of both extreme morality and also of extreme and hidden power. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence would be felt for generations to come, even if their names were often erased from the official history. They had lived a life of extraordinary passion and intellect, and they had done it all on their own terms, in a world that was never truly theirs. This was their world, a place of secrets and power, where they were the ones truly in charge of the games that were being played in the dark. They were the ultimate self-made women, and their story is one of triumph, tragedy, and the extraordinary power of the human spirit to survive and to truly thrive. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence was the secret pulse of the Victorian era, a time of both great change and great and hidden tradition. They were the masters of their own destiny, women who had chosen a path of danger and had reached the very heights of secret and political power. They had achieved what few others could, a life of freedom and influence in a world that was designed to keep them small and completely and totally silent. They were the heart of the city's secret life, the women who made the Victorian era a time of both extreme morality and also of extreme and hidden power. They were the queens of the shadows, and their influence would be felt for generations to come, even if their names were often erased from the official history. They had lived a life of extraordinary passion and intellect, and they had done it all on their own terms, in a world that was never truly theirs. This was their world, a place of secrets and power, where they were the ones truly in charge of the games that were being played in the dark.